The 8 pages were already on the desk in the Oval Office when the cameras came in. Most of the press corps was watching the man. They should have been watching the document. Because on page 6, in a single clause that ran fewer than 40 words, the government of Iran had asked for something no Iranian government has ever asked for in writing before. It wasn't sanctions relief. It wasn't frozen assets. It wasn't even uranium. It was one word. A word that, in international maritime law, changes the meaning of a body of water. The word was buried so deep in the legal phrasing that most of the press corps walked right past it. The president didn't. And the language he used on camera 20 minutes later was the language of a man who had been told exactly what that one word would cost. At 13:45 UTC on May 11th, in the Oval Office, the President of the United States described the document on his desk in 2 sentences. He called it a piece of garbage. He said the ceasefire with Iran was now, in his words, on massive life support. He added that if the ceasefire expired the following day, lots of bombs would start going off. The clips ran inside the hour on AP, BBC, Bloomberg, Reuters, PBs, and every wire on the planet. Brent crude moved more than 3% on the remarks alone. The United Kingdom and France announced emergency defense talks on a Hormuz shipping protection mission before the New York markets closed. The official reading of the moment was straightforward. The nuclear deal had collapsed. The war was coming back. Energy markets were pricing in disruption. That is the version you have read everywhere. There is, however, one detail in those Oval Office remarks that almost no clip kept. A second after he called the document garbage, the president said something else. He said he had not finished reading it. He said he was not going to waste his time. Hold on to that. We are coming back to it. There is also a single word inside the 8 pages he did not finish reading. That word is the entire story. To find it, you have to go back to April 27th, 2 weeks before the Oval Office moment. Iran's first offer to Washington landed on a Sunday. The framing in the Western press, including the New York Times and Foreign Policy, was technical and almost dismissive. Iran was proposing to reopen the Strait of Hormuz to commercial traffic in exchange for the United States lifting its naval blockade and postponing nuclear talks. Postponing. That verb is the move. Tehran was not refusing nuclear negotiations. Tehran was decoupling them. Quietly, in the language of a diplomatic offer, the Iranian government was telling the United States that the nuclear file and the maritime file were now 2 separate files, and that the maritime file would be settled first. By the time the May 11th proposal landed in Washington, the decoupling was finished. The document the president called garbage was barely a nuclear document. The nuclear language inside it was vestigial, almost ceremonial. The operative paragraphs, the ones with legal teeth, were about who controls a 21-mile strip of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. The Iranian Foreign Ministry framed the proposal publicly as reasonable, sovereign, and lawful under international convention. Western coverage treated it as a nuclear counterproposal. It was not. The nuclear story was the wrapper. The maritime story was the package. And the man who decided to send that package to Washington was not the man Western television keeps showing you. It was not Pezeshkian alone. It was not Khamenei alone. We will come to who it was. The word was sovereignty. In the document, in a clause attached to the Strait of Hormuz, Iran asked the United States to recognize Iranian sovereignty over the strait. In ordinary English, that phrase sounds reasonable. In international maritime law, it is the opposite of reasonable. Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, the Strait of Hormuz is what is called an international strait. Every ship, civilian or military, has a treaty right of transit passage through it. No coastal state can charge for that passage. No coastal state can deny it. No coastal state can claim it. If a coastal state declares sovereignty over an international strait, every other state's treaty right inverts. Transit becomes permission. Permission becomes leverage. Leverage becomes price. The numbers behind that sentence are the reason it cannot be granted. About 20% of the world's seaborne oil moves through the Strait of Hormuz, about a quarter of all liquefied natural gas, 21 million barrels of crude every day, roughly $1.2 billion in cargo every 24 hours, through a gap that, at its narrowest, is 21 miles wide. That is the math the president was briefed on before he walked into the Oval Office. That is why the language he chose was the language of a man who had been told the cost. There is one more actor in this calculation, and they have been very quiet. China imports roughly 90% of Iran's oil exports. Beijing has said nothing publicly about the sovereignty clause. Silence in this kind of negotiation is not neutrality. It is a position. If Iran's claim is accepted, Beijing's energy lifeline becomes legally Tehran's to license. That is leverage China has wanted for a decade. I have read documents written like this before. The way the maritime paragraph is built, 3 clauses, no concessions, no off-ramp, is the way you write a paragraph you do not expect the other side to sign. You write it that way when you want the rejection on the record. I have to add one honest thing here. The nuclear story is still real. Iran's enrichment program is advancing, with or without this proposal. The sovereignty framing does not replace the nuclear file. It sits on top of it. That is what makes this so hard to negotiate. It is 2 negotiations stacked, and neither side can win one without losing the other. So, who actually decided to put the sovereignty clause on paper? The Iranian system has 3 layers, and they all signed off. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps drafted the maritime language. President Pezeshkian carried it as the diplomatic face. Supreme Leader Khamenei approved the framing in advance. The piece that has not been reported is what happened in March, in a series of low-profile meetings between Iranian officials and Chinese counterparts. The maritime framing that appeared in the April 27th proposal tracks, almost paragraph by paragraph, the legal architecture Beijing has been quietly road testing for the South China Sea. That is what was greenlit. Not a war. A framing. The framing went into the proposal. The proposal went to Washington. The president called it garbage. Which brings the situation to a place with 3 doors and a clock. The first door is the smallest, roughly 1 in 4. Oman or Qatar brokers a quiet 30-day technical extension. The maritime file is parked without resolution. The nuclear file is frozen. Both sides walk back from the public statements without admitting they have walked back. It is the cheapest exit and the hardest one to take because nobody wants to be the side that retreated first. The second door is the most likely, about 40%. The ceasefire formally lapses. No immediate strikes. The naval blockade tightens. Brent drifts to $95, maybe $110 a barrel. Insurance underwriters do the work that warships would have done in the 1980s. The conflict becomes financial rather than kinetic. The third door is the escalation door, about 35%, which is higher than analysts will say in public. The United States strikes Iranian naval or enrichment assets within 2 weeks. Iran responds against Gulf shipping or a U.S. base in Iraq or Syria. Brent goes past 130. The Emirati strike of May 8th was the preview, not the climax. The Houthi vector reopens in the Red Sea. The red line in all 3 scenarios is the same. If the sovereignty word is repeated in a UN forum, and Russia or China refuses to vote it down, every Gulf monarchy has to recalculate whether its oil leaves the Gulf as international cargo or as Iranian licensed traffic. Once that vote is recorded, it cannot be unrecorded. We have seen a version of this before. In 1987, the United States and Iran fought the tanker war in these same waters. That war ended because both sides quietly agreed not to name the thing they were really fighting over. They left the legal status of the strait ambiguous. The ambiguity is what bought 38 years of relative peace. The May 11th document removed the ambiguity. Precision in this region is the opposite of safety, which is the last thing to say. The President of the United States called the document garbage and then admitted he had not finished reading it. That is not a small detail. It means the President did not reject Iran's proposal. He rejected the idea of being seen accepting it. The decision was made before the document was read, which tells you who is actually running U.S. policy on Iran this week, and it is not entirely the man at the desk. The sovereignty word is now in the diplomatic record. It cannot be put back. Whether or not bombs go off this week, the maritime law map of the world shifted on a Monday afternoon in May, while the cameras were watching the press conference and not the page. Your next tank of gas in Birmingham, in Manchester, in Houston, in Los Angeles, is downstream of that page. The next insurance premium on a container ship leaving Singapore is downstream of that page. The next election cycle on both sides of the Atlantic, the one where energy prices will quietly decide a vote share neither party wants to talk about, is downstream of that page. There are roughly 14 international straits in the world that function the way Hormuz functions. The Bosporus, the Bab el-Mandeb, Malacca, the Taiwan Strait, depending on how you count it. If the answer to this one is sovereignty, ask yourself which one comes next. Beijing is asking that question already. So is Moscow. So, very quietly, are several capitals that have not made the news this week. The man with the desk in the Oval Office has not answered it. Neither has the man in Tehran. Neither has the chamber in Turtle Bay, where the vote, if it comes, will be recorded. That is the question the most powerful people in the room have left on the table tonight. What do you think happens next? Drop it below.